Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's talk. I'm David Grundy, the Secretary of the London Central Branch. This is a hybrid event, and our speaker, Mike Lloyd, will be addressing us remotely because he recently had the coronavirus. So let me tell you a bit about Mike. Mike is a technology leader and fellow of the BCS, and his passion is to democratize deep tech. In September 2013, he founded LearnTech, a London-based technology startup to build learning solutions focused on AI, IoT, and climate change mitigation. LearnTech works with a wide range of organizations, including Microsoft, Pearson, and McKinsey. He's also the author of Schooling at the Speed of Thought and numerous courses, including AI Demystified, AI for Leaders, and Digital Technology Demystified. He's also the inventor of Zep Island, an educational game that helps people learn how technology and data can be used to help mitigate against climate change. So over to you, Mike.
Thanks, David. Thanks very much. Yeah, okay, cool. So I think I should clarify what virus I've got. So I've tested positive for COVID. So that'll teach me for going down the pub. So I'm very envious of you all being there because I know what great food and drink the British Computer Society does after these events. So, okay, so this session is going to be shorter than we originally planned. It was chalked in for 2 hours, finishing at 8:30. One of the things that this is based on an event that we did last year in Athens, and it was all group based. It's all activity based, so it wasn't much of a presentation. It was much more of a hands-on workshop, and I was planning to do a mini version of that tonight, and that would have taken about 2 hours to do. So, but given that I'm not there and I can't kind of help organize people in groups and give tasks and have interaction as much, I'm going to treat it as a presentation and make it shorter, and we can have as long as you want at the end to discuss whatever you want to discuss, which hopefully will be a lot. I have to tell you, as I say, I got COVID. I'm currently at the back end of it, but I may have to stop every now and again with my voice, and I'm certainly going to need to take a break halfway through. So, but apart from that, I'm all right. I don't expect to keel over. I expect to be on my feet for the full 2 hours, so don't worry too much about that. So, what do we do? So my company builds content and learning systems for a range of clients. And so when I say content, it's maybe a bit like some of the things you're going to see tonight, but also video and other things, whatever it takes to get across complex concepts. The other thing we do is we build learning systems. So in particular for AI and for climate change modeling, we actually build systems that allow people to do the learning on those things as well. So we're very busy, and we have a wide range of clients, and we're acquiring new clients every year. So it's a great space to be in. Our focus areas are really anything deep tech. AI we've been involved in for a very long time, and climate change seems to be coming right to the top of everybody's agenda. And humanizing technology, there's a growing interest in that and what that's all about. So that's what I'm going to take you through today. So our agenda is really how might we change the digital world so that we engender trust. And I think the important thing is that this entire presentation is about trust, and I'll give you the reasons why there's a focus on trust now. But I also have to acknowledge that we've done a lot of this work is based on a lot of work done out of the Center for Humane Technology, and the work of Tristan Harris, who I think is an absolute genius in this area. He's actually brilliant and a great driver and a great leader for humanizing technology. And the goal really is for you to think about how you can personally take action on some of the issues we're going to raise tonight. And I think it's worth also saying, and I don't want this to be seen as an attack on technology as a whole. I am a deeply technological person. I started in the car industry in 16 years of age. and work my way through. And my life has been in technology, and I've seen the benefits that it brings. So I don't want this to be thought of as some kind of anti-technology ideology. Far from it. It's quite the opposite, in fact. The other key question: can we redesign technology to overcome people's limitations and not simply reinforce them? That is a key aspect of technology these days, and a belief I share with the Center for Humane Technology, that technology currently exploits people's limitations rather and reinforces them. So the question is, how can we overcome people's limitations and not reinforce them? And as I say, the key thing here is what direct action can you take? Can we all take as people in the technology world to address the problem of trust in technology?
Mike.
Yes.
Hi there. This is Darling.
Hello, Darling.
Rain stopped play, but we've just had a whole crowd of people come in just now.
Okay.
So would you mind just rerunning this slide and then carrying on from here, or if you like, just give a very brief intro to the slides you've already covered?
Okay.
Great.
All right. So key points then. This presentation is above all else is about trust in technology. We've leveraged a lot of the work from the Center for Humane Technology. The goal of this session is for you to think about how you can personally take action. What is it? What specific things can you do? And I guess another key point here really is that this is not an attack on technology as a whole. I'm a deep believer in the benefits of technology, and worked in technology all of my life, and I believe that technology can do some great things. It's just a question of how can we bring it back on course so that it is trusted more than it is at the moment. Okay, so as I say, I might have to stop every now and again to clear my throat, but we shall soldier on. Okay, so the other thing I want to clear up at the start is that this presentation is not an uncosted wish list based on political ideology. And I've written in my notes here, pause for laughter. No, okay. It was a Liz Truss joke. Anyway, I shall carry on. But this is not just about doing the right thing because it's right to do so, but it's because doing the right thing brings rewards, right? And not doing the right thing is simply not sustainable and eventually brings penalties. And one example we can look at here, for instance, is you've seen Meta's stock price has kind of hit the floor. And last year, there was a survey that showed that people's distrust in Meta was at 73%. So, those two things are not unrelated. So according to Ernst & Young, technology is experiencing an erosion of trust by consumers. So that's one key kind of thing which is happening at the moment and impacting on the world of technology. Consumer interaction and online revenue is being affected by this. All right, there's more players for to share a market which is no longer growing at the rate that it was, but still trust is a major issue for big technology companies. And but conversely, it's also becoming a competitive differentiator. If you can win over the trust of people, then you will win more customers than those who can't. And it's kind of common sense in a way. According to the WEF, employees at high trust companies have more energy at work and are 50% more productive than those who aren't. So if your company is trustworthy and trusted by its customers, it's a lot easier to work in than those which aren't. And customers are motivated to buy from brands that embody their values and beliefs. So I want to be clear, as I say from the start, that this is not some kind of politically driven ideology. This presentation is about, at the end of the day, it's about business and doing business in the right way and doing it in business in a fair way and winning trust of people in order to grow business, but also to do that in a way which is positive for the planet and for its inhabitants. So, so in order to do this, and again, I want to be, it's a bit of a kind of high wire act this in some ways, because it's very easy to kind of get off down into, you know, political rabbit holes. So rather than saying, you know, what's right or what's wrong, whatever, the easiest way really to go through this is to look at the impacts of technology on a fictitious family. So we've made up a family, we call them the humans, and we'll look at each of those, each of the humans and their personalities, and then how does technology currently affect them, and you know what can be done to make it better. So okay, so this is the humans family, right? So we've got Melissa, Hassan, Megan, Daniel, and Brian. I won't read all of these to you, but you can read this for yourself. What I'd like you to do while you're looking at this is to think about somebody you know who matches that kind of profile. You know, so Melissa, 46 years of age, a scientist, and working in biotech, but she could be a professional in any sphere. Hassan, a university student with very strong political views, and a climate change activist. Megan, 15 years of age at high school, has got aspirations for working in fashion. Daniel, who's runs his own small company, and then Brian, the uncle, who's 49 years old, didn't go to university and believes in conspiracy theories. So I'm sure we all know people who can kind of fit these profiles. So let's go through the presentation to ground us in what this is all about, which is really a kind of major question. Are these people I've just introduced you to numbers? Are they just numbers? So can anybody tell me who this person is? Anybody know?
Cambridge Analytica.
Bingo. Okay, yeah, it's Alexandra Nix. Apparently, the last I read, he's banned from being a director of a company in this country, at least until 2027. But not a very nice chap, and but very helpfully explained in immense detail how they supported Trump's campaign, and how they use technology to do that. There's a great YouTube video which is well worth watching. It kind of makes you cringe, and you think, my God, you know, how can these people think of other people in these ways? But it's well worth watching that video. So I think that the key to this is really the idea that this is about hacking the brain. So we think about hacking computers. The same kind of principles have been used for what's commonly kind of called brain hacking, where you use psychology and, you know, science of the brain to really understand how to deliver messages to where they're going to resonate the most. And this guy, you basically use technology to deliver psychological trickery to millions of US voters. And the methods he used originated in military psychological warfare. In fact, it had to be done in this country because they couldn't get an export license to actually take it out of the country and use it in the United States. And what they did, which got him into deep trouble, was using 87 million Facebook profiles without permission. So, you know, this guy's biggest contribution to humanity, he claims, was Trump's election in 2016. Now, one of the key things that he explains in this video is how they used something called the ocean method, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. But it's a way of converting personality traits into numbers. So let's take a closer look at that. This is the ocean matrix, and you score people on the basis of their openness, their conscientiousness, excuse me, the extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism, so on. Use these terms, and you can analyze people's online behaviors. You can analyze anything which is available via their data online to put them into these categories in different ways. And it sounds kind of relatively sophisticated, but it's not actually. I mean, all you then do is you tailor a message and you target it at a given emotion. So you say, well, what do we want? What emotion do we want to evoke in these people? So each person would be, and we see this with the family, each member of the family will have a different type of emotion that you're trying to tailor your message to. Because the goal is is an engineered result. And that is almost always it's either money or power. Power eventually gets converted into money. So it all ends up in money at the end of the day. So this is what Cambridge Analytica did on a massive scale, and they kind of blew the lid on the use of this approach, is ocean approach. So how it would work, for example, is excuse me just a sec. Yeah, so in terms of turning this into a set of numbers, you've got each person would have a matrix against them, and then they would score on each of these ocean categories, and you end up with a profile and a score for each one. So then what you would do is you'd say, okay, well, we now understand each of these people in some detail. So let's just take Melissa, for example. We could say that her dominant ocean trait is openness. So we will target her imagination and her ability to abstract and have insights. And we know that this kind of personality would look at a piece of information very objectively. So she's looking for numbers. So we give her some numbers. Hassan would be has a different personality and is driven by empathy and compassion. So his main trait is being agreeable. So you give him a message to get him to play on his empathy and get him to help others by doing whatever it is that you want him to do. Megan is suffering from social anxiety, though she's an extrovert, and she wants to fit in. So you'd say, this is what cool people do. So if you want to be like them, then you should do this or buy that or whatever. Daniel is mainly conscientious. His sensitivity to his status as somebody who's dependable. So you'd say, well, let's target his sensitivity to wanting to be seen to be dependable. So do this for your dependents. And then finally, Brian, who's neurotic, he would then be targeted in terms of his pessimism, jealousy, fear, and so on. And this, I think, to be fair, is probably where most of the kind of nefarious activities take place in terms of, conspiracy theories and the rest of it. So it's playing on people's pessimism, their jealousy, their fears, their anxieties, and so on. And there, the message is very simple: is do X or Y will happen to you. So one, currently in the news at the moment, just to pluck it out of the air, there was a hate attack in Kent on the weekend with immigrants, and it's quite clear that people perpetrating that kind of thing think that these people who come into this country are there to threaten them or to take their jobs or make their lives worse or whatever. So that's where this kind of thing plays in, where you've got pessimism, jealousy, fear, and so on. So those are fairly susceptible people to be targeted with whatever messages you want. So let's start unpicking some of the kind of scenarios and some of the kind of key technologies that drive all of this. So one of them, you could say, well, one of the big advents of certainly in the last 20 years or so, has been the the arrival of mobile phones and the proliferation of mobile phones, and the amount of time which young people spend on them. I mean, it's inordinate. I mean, even, you know, people of my age are spending far too much time on mobile phones. But a key question you've got to ask is, have our behaviors been manipulated in any way? And, you know, that's not all necessarily going to be bad, right? You know, we receive adverts for things, and we buy things which perhaps, you know, appeal to us and so on the basis of that. So I'm not saying that this is 100% all terrible and bad, but what I am saying is that there are certain traits and there's certain aspects of it which are really deeply questionable from a moral kind of point of view, and certainly from a trust point of view. So the question then would be, you know, was Megan's have her behaviors been manipulated? So a really fascinating piece of work done by the Center for Humane Technology was on social media, as social media having borrowed technology from the gambling industry. So the series there was called, you know, What Happened in Las Vegas Should Actually Stay in Las Vegas, but it didn't. It kind of migrated to Silicon Valley. And what they show quite clearly, with some very, very good and robust research, is that a lot of the things that we are used to, you know, the scrolling paradigm, rewards and so on, they're based on slot machine design. So, you know, the early designers of these systems actually went to, you know, they went to Vegas, and this is what they come up with, you know. So, so when we get likes on whatever we post, oh great, we got a like, fantastic, you know. But that's engineered. That's not something which just, you know, just appeared there out of nowhere. That was deliberately designed into the system to make it more addictive for us. The other thing, of course, is that they the infinite scroll, you know, or just a little bit more, just a little bit more. What's the next story? You know, what's so and so been saying? And there's constant scrolling, more. This is all rewarded. Okay, you know, there's a feedback loop there, which feeds itself on continuous engagement. So people's engagement with this technology has been designed. This is not something which is accidental. It's not just a great product that's out there and it's so good we just keep on using it all the time. It's designed to be to work in that way, and I think we need to get smart about that. So another key thing to look at is search. And if you think about the way in which search is evolving, it used to be that you would just plug in a term or whatever and you'd look for, you know, references, up comes a link. But now there's a real effort on behalf of search companies to, and they're quite open about this, they want to answer all of our questions. And it's like, really? So there's a big difference between like asking the best way to make a souffle to, you know, something which a student is being asked to do as part of their homework, or potentially even part of coursework for school, which is a key part of their learning. You know, higher stakes learning activities. There's a big difference between that and some of the trivial stuff which you might use it for. And, you know, it worries me, you know, to see the extent to which young people, you know, rely on search to answer assignments, basically. So the question would be, you know, is Megan's view of the world being formed and actually distorted by extensive use of search? And, you know, is that good? Well, I think part of the answer for that comes when we realize that search is not actually search, it's sort. We're used to, you know, using the term search engine. It should actually be called a sort engine. And let's think about, if you had to set up a company today to deliver a Google type service, what would you have to do, right? Well, the first thing that you have to do is you'd have to find a way to frame all of the information on the World Wide Web. So that in itself is a colossal task. I mean, how do you actually begin to do that? It's a huge, huge endeavor in its own right. Just framing it, literally, finding a way to set up computer systems to put your arms around all of this information. The second thing you've got to do is you've got to select from all of that, and you have to select a manageable lump of information, because you can't deluge somebody with every single bit of potentially relevant information from across the entire World Wide Web. That would just be completely impossible to do. So you have to really narrow down what it is and select out of that field of data. You have to basically bring that down to a sample which is manageable. So that in itself is a selection process. And we need to be clear about this, that this information has been selected. The next thing has got to be prioritized, because it's no good you having information or links coming to you which aren't relevant to what it is that you want, or the most relevant or furthest away from the top. So, those are three things which you've got to do as a search organization in order to deliver a service. And then, of course, you've got to present it, right? You've got to wrap that up into a nice web wrapper and present that to people so that they can make use out of it. Now, the key thing is that all of this costs an absolute colossal amount of money. So if you think you've got billions and billions of users, the numbers are just absolutely astronomical, which means that the revenue has to be more astronomical in order to make it a profitable business. If it was not profitable, it wouldn't last very long at all. So there's 5 steps of the process: frame, select, prioritize, present, and then convert. You have to convert what you present to people in your search or in your sort. You must turn that into revenue. And it's on aggregate. It might be that, we don't think that we're actually contributing that. If, you type in, souffle into Google tonight, you don't think that you're being charged, but it's microtransactions, and it's the little things that you get exposed to that you're not really entirely aware of, that all adds up into, when billions of people are doing it, ends up as a lot of money going in as revenue. Otherwise, they wouldn't be building fancy new buildings in King's Cross, right? So again, I'm not throwing the whole thing out and saying this is all bad, isn't it? Because hell, I use Google every day, right? I'm sure most of you do. But I think the key point I'm making here is we have to be aware of the business model that sits behind this, and where they're trying to take it, and ask the question: is that good for everybody? And it's particularly in this case, is it good for children in schools to be as heavily reliant on the technology as they appear to be? So and there are other questions which come out of this as well. So you've got there's a great article in Wired recently in August this year about how Google search is quietly damaging democracy. And the point that they were making is that when you independently conduct search on topics, and let's talk mainly about social topics here and things which will inevitably affect democracy in one way or another, people doing it feel like they're engaging in self-discovery. And it's called the IKEA effect of misinformation. It's when you piece together your own narrative from whatever sources you want, you're more likely to trust the narrative that you yourself have built, rather than hearing a narrative from an authoritative source. So really what a lot of people are doing online is they're following breadcrumb trails of information that have been left there by people who are basically spreading misinformation. So the other thing which comes out of this as well is simple inaccuracies. So there was a good case in the Washington Post earlier on this year where it was saying that facial recognition identified extremists storming the Capitol as Antifa. So in other words, it was there was a claim that the people who were actually instigating the Capitol Hill riots were actually from the left rather than from the far right. And that myth just kept on perpetuating, on Google and other search organizations as well. So and it stuck. That was something which then stuck. So there's inaccuracy, there's the IKEA effect. Those are two things which are problematic. And the other thing, of course, is that you have confirmation bias, which leads to people just being in bubbles. And if you just keep on following the links that you're given, then you'll end up closer and closer to people who share your worldview, and you end up in isolated bubbles. So this is something which I think we need to be really clear about, that search looks like search on the surface, but in fact what we're doing is sort. All right, so let's switch gears to something slightly different now. So surveillance capitalism is a commonly used term these days. So another disruptive technology is the second of the two big. First of all, search is a majorly disruptive technology in this regard, but also recommendation engines. So if you take a very simple case like Daniel thinks he might want to buy an electronic gadget online, he automatically clicks on an online store, possibly with a name beginning with A. And so the question is, how will the online store use their algorithms and what they know about Daniel to influence his behavior? Well, I'm sure we're all pretty familiar with recommendation engines, but it's worth kind of digging a little bit about how these work. So if you start off with Daniel and we look at what he's bought an iPad and he's bought a camera, and then another chap who we don't know bought exactly the same things. So the recommendation engine goes, well, they must be similar then, mustn't they? Maybe. Similar in that regard for sure. This chap on the right, he bought a robot as well. So why don't we suggest to Daniel that he buys a robot? Bingo, Daniel has bought the robot. Okay, happy days. Nothing particularly nefarious about that. And I think that we all actually we don't mind it in certain circumstances. I mean, Netflix is just such an enormous repository of videos. You wouldn't possibly want to go just sifting through every one. So sometimes these things can be very helpful. But what happens if we want to? What happens if we start thinking about videos in a bit more detail? For instance, now videos can influence people and do, right? So you watch a video on something, particularly in the political domain, it's a very common way of getting messages across. So we can have a look at it in terms of like how a recommender algorithm would work. You'd read your users' data, you'd get the users' video ratings, you would correlate the ratings with other users' ratings, you get similarity matches to other users in the same way as we've just looked at now, but with a bit more sophistication. You'd get top-rated videos from matched users. You'd filter out videos that the users already watched. Then you'd recommend top-rated videos from the matched users to the user. And then the last thing you do, which is probably the most important bit, is you'd nudge this prioritized list to align with effective marketing methods. So I guess the question then is, so what do we mean by effective marketing methods? Well, what we mean crudely is this. Now this is something real from a real online marketing agency. And I had what I guess could be called a digital altercation on LinkedIn with somebody who was trying to sell this to me. And I was thinking, what are you being serious? So so what it is, it's fairly simple in some ways. It's not at all dissimilar to what Alexander Nix was doing. Is you have to, if you want to get your message really, nailed down quickly and effectively so that people remember it and act on it, the theory goes that you have to appeal to the reptilian brain. So so what does this actually mean in terms of what you have to do? Well, you need to target and personalize your messages. And obviously that's very easy to do these days with online systems and with recommendation engines in particular. Use contrast, and we'll look at an example in a minute so you can see that. Use tangible concepts. That means that you're appealing to a part of the brain which is not involved in abstract reasoning. All right, you're deliberately going after the part of the brain which deals with the concrete, here and now, survival, modes, and it's just the most base part of the brain. Be visual. Well, that kind of, if you're looking for survival, then clearly your eyes are your biggest asset. So be visual, and then get emotional. So we can have a look at some examples of this. But so I thought it'd be a good idea to have a look at my brain actually, and so this is my brain. I had to take a photograph of it and submit it as part of my fellowship application at the BSc. So it's quite hard to do actually, but anyway, let's have a look at how this works. So the kind of reptilian brain, or the base of the brain, the stem, is where this kind of messaging is targeted. Now, my wife would say that actually the picture's upside down, but I don't think so. So what you see there on the left is actually my YouTube recommendation list, which I know you must be looking at now and thinking, God, this guy must be so interesting to have around for dinner. But this is true. There's nothing made up here. I just grabbed it because it was kind of like the nearest thing to what I was looking for. And we can actually see this at work, right? So you've got, at the top, you got a guy who, there's no contrast. There's no tangible concepts. There's mapping the future of technology from IBM, which I think stands for I'm a boring man, actually, in this particular case. It's hardly visual, and it's not likely to, kind of kick up any emotions with me. But as you go down, and this is a prioritized playlist. So eventually the goal would be that you would, you work your way down through these. So every time you get the recommendation, you're kind of working your way down through this list. And this is fairly innocuous, right? But you can imagine if some of this, if this was political, how that works. But what we've got at the bottom is a video being recommended saying the universe is not real. Well, does it use contrast? Absolutely, right? It's contrast with everything else that's there. Does it use tangible concepts? Well, that's a really interesting thing. It depends on whether the universe is real or not, I guess. So you have to be a philosopher to work out that one. But it's kind of, it's pretty tangible if you compare it to mapping to the future of technology. It's much more concrete than that. Is it visual? Hell yes, look at that. I mean, that's pretty visual, right? And emotional, well, I don't know about you, but I'd feel rather emotional if I did actually find out that this whole thing just wasn't real, right? I know that we're virtual today, but if the whole thing just wasn't real, I think that's something to get emotional about, perhaps. So the one which I really didn't understand was this one, how to change a thermostatic radiator valve the easy way. I mean, what they should have done there is really what ought to have gone in there is, you know, how do you call a plumber, basically. But that's my intriguing video list. On the other one towards the bottom, again, getting down to the more base end of the brain, the emotional end of the brain, is should you learn AI? Well, having spent the best part of 5 years doing so, if somebody tells me now that I shouldn't have, then that's certainly something to get emotional about. So there we are. So that is a common approach to that is a very common approach now to advertising and marketing, is trying to get down into the base of the brain with simple, concrete messages that are visual and grab people's emotions. Okay, so let's switch gear again. And this time we can talk a little bit about artificial intelligence. So Melissa is applying for a job. How might artificial intelligence affect the fairness of the outcome? Well, so one of the key things frequently used now in AI is natural language processing. In recruitment, is natural language processing and word frequency. It's fairly crude. I mean, we in our workshop on this, we can demonstrate that very easily in just a few lines of code. There's nothing particularly complex about that at all. So it's literally counting the number of words, and you're looking for particular kinds of words to make a judgment on an application. Now, some of these technologies are kind of brought together with other technologies, so you wouldn't necessarily just use that or just use it on its own, but it's the type of thing which is being used. Another one which is a kind of more sophisticated take in it is sentiment analysis. So here again, you can, with just a relatively few lines of code and the right libraries, you can get a feeling of sentiment from either from an application, or sometimes what people do now is they'll give you something to write, and they'll say, I want you to go away and write a piece on what you would do if you were given, I don't know, $10,000 to go and invest in XYZ by this company. What would you do with it, right? So it's looking through the sentiment behind the words that are used, and they're looking for things like positive, negative, or neutral words. So so that kind of wraps that side of it in terms of artificial intelligence. We can look at that in a bit more detail. Artificial intelligence kind of underpins an awful lot of what we're talking about here, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit later about explainable AI. What I'd like to do for now, though, there's like a second half which we can get into. I think it'd be good just to kind of come up for air, and I can take some questions, and then we can get into a part two. So I'll stop sharing my screen for now. So are there any questions which people would like to ask at this point?
Hi, Mike.
Hello.
We've got a comment from Kitty.
Yeah.
There are so many fake accounts and bots on social media, particularly on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. The social media operators don't want to do anything about it, even though real human users have lost their trust on social media. Those fake accounts and bots are created by malicious people to spread propaganda and misinformation.
Yes. Is that a question? Sorry. There's a comment. Yeah. Okay. No, I mean that's fair. I wouldn't disagree with a lot of that. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting one, saying the social media operators don't want to do anything about it. My feeling is that a lot of them, a lot of players in this space get stuck into a mode of operation. It's very difficult to change. You know, if you're making your money out of advertising, that's how you start your business, then it's it's difficult to imagine for a lot of companies how they would come out of that and start going for start a business on a subscription model. So so I think, you know, that I don't believe that the technology industry is inherently evil. You know, I don't think that's the case at all. I mean, I worked in big tech, and I'm not being surrounded by evil people at all. But I think that the problem is that they get locked into a mode, and then it's very difficult for them to, you know, to change it. Changing an internal company culture is very, very difficult compared to setting a new company up in the first place with a new set of values, right? So so I would agree that that there are huge problems, and that's the main reason for wanting to do this today. But I think the answer lies with us all, and I think we all have things that we can do, and we all have social power, and we all have tasks which we're tasked with on a daily basis that we can exercise our ethics on. So okay, so well, that's why Elon Musk is trying to eradicate fake accounts on Twitter and turn Twitter. Well, okay, well, I don't know, Kitty, you have more information on that than I do. I know that Elon Musk has just fired his entire board today at Twitter, so I don't really know what he's trying to do, to be honest with you. And I'm not altogether sure that he does half of the time. So okay.
Mike,
So,
do you want more questions now or later?
Well, let's move on. Yeah, that's probably. I was thinking we'd need to take a break because my voice was going to be broken, but it's not. So I think we can plow on actually. So let's let me just reshare my screen. Okay. Part 2. Right, let's have a think about a section I'm calling the people versus the people. It's how do you turn people in on themselves? And again, I'm not sure that all of this is particularly intended to come out in this way, but you know, that's the way the technology seems to be moving. So let's have a look at a bit more detail about Brian. And so Brian is he believes in conspiracy theories, and he's not alone, far from it. And the question is he being manipulated? And I guess a big question is, if so, why, right? And who's benefiting from that manipulation? Now, I think one thing which in the course of researching for this work last year and prior to that as well is that what we're dealing here with disinformation is actually a business, and people tend to think that, you know, the disinformation is spread out there by nutters basically, but that's really far from the truth. The people who come up with a lot of this disinformation are very intelligent people, and actually in some cases they treat it entirely as a job. And you know, there's a lot of I've heard from numerous sources about literally disinformation factories in some parts of the world. You probably your guess would be as good as mine where they are, but they are, you know, in places that you can imagine have got low trust governments, and they literally, you know, they have a car park outside. They've got, you know, demarc places for your car. You go in and you kind of say, "Morning, everybody." You have a coffee. You sit there, and it's no different to it's no different to going into any other place of work these days. So you know, these people are on salaries and they just churn out this rubbish. And why are they doing it? Well, they're doing it for money. And so disinformation is a business, really. There's a lot of amateurs involved. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not all professional. You know, there's a lot of people kind of doing this in their bedrooms and, you know, spinning out yarns and all the rest of it. But at the base of the chain is a hardcore business thinking. And there are several models, but there are two kind of sources of money. One is disruptors. So you can take a country like Russia, for example, who think that it's in their interest to sow disruption in the West. So they will supply money to organizations to come up with this disinformation. And either that or you have advertising money. And very often these are linked. So they will then produce the disinformation. They will target it at people's emotional kind of centers of the brain, and they know exactly who they're targeting and what they want to target them with. And the goal is to invoke outrage. So it's like, oh God, you would never believe this. Well, actually, no. But it's like, this is absolutely outrageous. And that's the goal, is how can we get people to be so outraged by this thing, whatever it is, that we get them to act on it. And what kind of action do you want? Well, one is that it'll influence some kind of politics. And as I said, very often politics turns back into money. So at the end of the day, it's money is the end goal, either directly or indirectly. That outrage will result in some kind of advertising. So, when you get these messages that have been sent from, a place like Breitbart, for instance, there's advertising attached to all of this. Breitbart don't exist for the love of humanity. They exist to make money, right? And it's advertising that drives this whole thing. And advertising, of course, influences shopping, and shopping brings in money. Right. So it's a very simple business chain if you think about it, or a value chain. I'm reluctant to call it a value chain because there's no value actually being added really into humanity, but it is really a value chain as such. Very, very simple one. So the question is, how do people make money from disinformation? Anybody know who this gentleman is?
Alex Jones.
Yes, indeed, Alex Jones. Yeah. Does anybody know the size of the fine that he's just incurred?
1 billion, near enough.
$1 billion, right? So I think what Alex Jones is showing that you have to make a lot of money in the disinformation business, eventually. But I don't know whether he actually started it off or not. I remember my first visit to the United States, and Rush Limbaugh was a shock jock. There's a wave of shock jocks on the radio. It was the same kind of thing. But what Alex Jones did, which kind of catapulted him up to the next level, was that of course, make it as an internet thing. He was able to intimately know his customers, and he's able to sell directly. So rather than bothering going down the advertising route, he'd actually sell them products. So one classic on this, just to illustrate how he did it, was he would say, he'd come on his show, and then he'd have somebody in a white coat pretending to be a scientist, saying that the federal government is pouring chemicals into reservoirs in order to control the minds of the general public in America. And it's just this bonkers pseudoscience, and people are gullible enough to believe him. And then he kind of let it sit there, and he'd be banging his fist on the deck saying, oh, this is outrageous, and people go, yeah, hell yeah, it's they shouldn't be doing that and all this. He'd let it sit for half an hour, and then next thing, funnily enough, he'd be selling water filters by the truckloads. Yeah, get these filters, it's going to stop you from ending up dumb or whatever, right? And he made an absolute fortune out of it, absolute fortune. And, the $1 billion that he's been fined is apparently, from what I've read at least, it's commensurate with the amount of money that he's actually got or is able to afford. So it's, this disinformation is a good business, I think, for for those who are evil enough to get into it. So so let's move to the core issue here, really, which is polarization. And I watched my wife's Brazilian, so we watched the results from Brazil come in over the weekend, and you're talking like 1 percentage point difference between Bolsonaro, this extreme right. Well, politician is probably not the right word, but this guy's been running the country for the past 4 years, far right, and a very far left now incumbent. So like 1 percentage point. I mean, but the thing which I find more remarkable than anything is the degree to which that country is polarized. There are families, including my own, who basically have, been cleaved in two on the basis of who they support. And this is shared across the world. I mean, the United States, is exactly the same there. I have friends living in the United States are saying, it's just gone crazy, and people hate each other, really hate each other there. So this has happened in Europe. If you look at Le Pen in France, and the rise of the right there, and how close a run she gave to Macron. You read the papers. I don't have to tell you this, but polarization is something which is extreme and happening everywhere, and is deeply, deeply damaging our societies. So so let's dig in a little bit into this and see what we can make of it. So Hassan is outraged by the far right thinking of his uncle. And his uncle Brian is equally as outraged by Hassan's far left thinking. Are they both being manipulated, and are they both being manipulated by technology? So that's the key question. So one part of the answer to this is what I would call the polarization engine, which is the sum total of social media, but particularly search and recommendation, and what it does for people's information diets. I'm sure all of you in the room, you've shown sufficient integrity and values to come out to a session on a wet Tuesday night on humanizing technology. I would imagine, therefore, that your information diets are very wide, and that you attempt to keep a balanced view on the world. But that's not the same with most people, and a lot of this has been driven by technology. So people's information diets are getting narrower and narrower. And the more time they spend in social media, and particularly the more time they spend in search and subject to recommendation engines, the narrower and narrower that gets. And the other thing which I think is really important, and it's a big change. I mean, I'm old enough to remember a time where none of this stuff existed. The internet just wasn't around. And you go to the pub, and if somebody in the pub said the earth is flat, you go, oh, yeah, you're nuts, and eventually that person probably wouldn't end up drinking in that pub anymore, right? They'd feel ostracized, especially in a small town. They'd probably feel very ostracized, and they'd go and think about something else. But now, if you think the world is flat, you can join other people who think that that's flat, and you say, oh, thank God it wasn't just me. Oh, there's loads of people who think that the earth is flat. So their information diets are narrowed to subjects that prove that the earth is flat. And it's social media and search and recommendation is driving this. So now this diagram, it looks very messy, but it's a very, very good analysis, actually. It's from Adfonts Media. And what they've done is they've mapped out, there's a couple of dimensions to this graph. On the y-axis, you've got the believability or the provability, if you like, of the facts which have been reported. So if you take at the top of it, you've got Associated Press and Reuters. They make their money through acquiring stories and then selling those stories to other organizations to, to do whatever they want to do with. So they don't have an axe to grind in terms of, putting a political color on it or, or exaggerating or anything like that. They just go out there. That's their job, is to find facts. At the bottom, you've got InfoWars that has got nothing to do with facts. In fact, it's the polar opposite, right? So that's on the y-axis. On the x-axis, you've got what I would call kind of traditional ideas of what left and right is. I mean, left and right, it seems to me, has gone full circle, and it's a much more blurry kind of proposition than it used to be in the past. But this gives us a good proxy, if you like, for people's information diets and what's happening to them and how they've been manipulated and why we're getting this polarization. So one of the things that we worked on was models for polarization, and I'll explain to you a model which we use in this. So we modeled all of this up in Python, and so we can kind of track iterations between people who perhaps previously might have shared the same kind of information diets as they leave university, for instance. So they might, let's say they leave university with a fairly wide, information diet. So they've got their greens, they've got their fruit, they've got their veg, they've got their fish, all the rest of it. And then in time, as life batters them into submission, their information diets become narrower and narrower. And the more social media they consume, the more they associate with people who think like themselves, the narrower those diets become. And the interesting thing is that you can start with a point where people are practically the same, but just a tiny nudge. It only takes maybe one or two articles, perhaps, or one video to shift people slightly in one direction, or the other, and then you get the cascading happening, where you end up with these completely polarized positions. And again, I think it's search or sort and recommendation that's driving so much of this. And particularly if you go to YouTube and you start following videos there and you pick up the recommendations there, you end up in these bubbles, and the bubbles will end up, will take you down into a rabbit hole, into less and less factual based stuff and more kind of emotionally driven content. And the model, which is well worth checking out, is Schelling's segregation model. And if you follow this link, I'll wrap up the slides and send them off later. But if you follow that link, there's a wonderful study on this. And Schelling came up, Thomas Schelling, by the way, the guy who came up with this, was an economist, and he won a Nobel Prize for this piece of work. But what he was looking at was how neighborhoods in cities in the United States start off multicultural, so you've got Hispanics, blacks, whites, Irish, everybody kind of, mixed together in one neighborhood. And then after a number of years, those become ghettos, and so you end up with a mainly black neighborhood, or a mainly Chinese neighborhood, or whatever. And so he was interested in that, and he looked at the causation there, and what he did is he tracked how kind of a homogeneous mass becomes a heterogeneous mass, and people end up in very slow stages at first, but eventually people end up being surrounded by people who are like themselves. And certainly to our way of looking at it, it's very much the same thing on social media. So social media gives you a means by which you can associate with people who are very much like you, share your worldview like yourself. As I said earlier on, if you're into the idea of the earth being flat, social media allows you to be with people like yourself who share that view. Okay. So, so Schelling's segregation model, I think, does an awful lot to explain the process by which this awful global polarization is taking place. So the big question then is, how might we develop and use digital technologies to build a healthier, sustainable, and more equitable world? That to me is the key thing. And I don't have the answers. I've posed a whole bunch of problems here, but I have some answers, but I certainly don't have them all. And I'm really leaning on you in the room to to think about this and how it affects you in your own way, and what you can actually do about this. So I'll just give you a couple of examples. The first example I'd give is that if you're working on apps on social media, it's not hard to do, right? To put in an intervention. I was looking at Facebook earlier, people in Brazil who were on the side of Bolsonaro, and very glad to see that Facebook had actually put in an intervention on their posts saying that the election has been called, and the official government authority for calling the election has named the winner. And they didn't say anything more than that. And then there's a link to say, go on to this site for more details, right? So they can do it. It can be done. And this kind of thing where you've got something which is blatantly rubbish. I mean, there are AIs which can be used to sift this out, and the question is whether they have the will to do it or not. But there are AIs which can sort this kind of thing out, and can label it, and can prompt users to do something different to what they were originally intending to do with it. So this kind of thing, I think this is not rocket science. This is something which is fairly straightforward to implement. It just requires a will to do so. Of course, they will argue that they're not a content company, they're a platform company, and they're not responsible for what people will do. And we've heard those arguments before, but frankly, they've stopped working. The other big one really is explainable AI, and that is a completely separate thing. I mean, we do another whole thing on explainable AI. I think that it's a very powerful concept, and I think it's got a long way. It can do a lot, I think, to start to get people's trust back in technology, and particularly in artificial intelligence. So the idea is that basically AI right now to an end user is a black box, and in fact to a lot of people who aren't data scientists, even people who are managing these systems, it's a black box. So right now, a user of AI with a task to do will not really understand why a decision has been made, or a prediction has been made, or a categorization has been made, or whatever. So really to start to regain trust, particularly in AI, then it needs to be better explained. So and you can build in these explainable models into the system, and add an interface which says, look, this is what we think this thing is, and here's the reasons why, or this is the categorization we've made, and here's the reason why, or this is the prediction that we've made, and these are the reasons why. And that's really the goal of XAI, and I think it's got a lot of potential for helping regain some trust. A very good example of it is NHS Predict, which is quite a serious thing. It's about options that are open to women who've had breast cancer, and it's the post-operative treatment. So clearly there's a massive role for data here in terms of informing people about what they ought to be doing in terms of treatment, but but clearly people are going to need to understand that. So, why is the data saying that this is the course of treatment that I should take? If you're telling me I should have chemotherapy, fine, but what's the reasons why that? And the more of this kind of thing ends up online and in algorithms, the more this kind of thing needs to be explained. But there's some very, very interesting work going on in explainable AI right now, and if you wanted to, I'd be more than happy to come back to the BCS and do a complete session on XAI. The other thing I think we can do is we can ask, all of us can ask, how does the piece of work that I have in front of me right here, right now, how does this support the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? Because if it doesn't, then the chances are that it's not really worth doing that much. And it's highly unlikely that something which doesn't fit in with these is going to fit in with the models which I showed earlier on. So, it's highly unlikely that it's going to, be damaging to society if it fits in with these. And so an example I'll give you of that from our own experiences, we built Microsoft's computer science framework for them, but we just turned it into a guide. So it's much more than just a framework now. And right at the outset, when the job landed on our desk, I said, look, we've got to build this whole thing with the sustainable development goals upwards. That becomes the foundation on which everything is built. And if you look at the work we've done in that, you'll see immediately that it shines through all of what we do. It all leads towards students understanding the role of technology in terms of sustainability and the SDGs. So I think we can all find ways of doing that in the work that we do. So what else we can do? I'm going to throw it open to questions, this being the key one in just a sec, but I will finish by asking you a question. And the question I want to ask you is, are these people real? Any takes on that? We've got any votes? Anybody can count votes? How many people think that it is real? I can't see your hands, but how many people would say that these are real people?
Only one person.
Only one person. Okay. So real or fake? Well, if there's only one person says they're real, most of you then in that case are right. These are all artificial intelligence generated images. So the entire family, none of these are actual real photographs of real people. They've all been generated through AI. So you can see how easy it is to, for manipulation to take place. So I'll just finish by saying that we do this session as a one-day thing. So it sounds quite a kind of heavy thing to be doing and sounds quite miserable, I guess, in parts, but it is quite fun to do. And we do a lot in code to demonstrate some of the key principles there, and we get people working in groups and coming up with cool things. And yeah, it's thought-provoking, and we get a lot done on those days. So if you're interested in that, then I'd be more than happy to talk to you about it. And if you just want to make a note of that, this is who I am, Mike at learntech.io. And with that, I'll throw it right open to questions for as long as you want to go. So yeah.
Okay, we've got an online question from Alex. Are there any scenarios where we could say that these paths could be used for good, say to influence people to stop climate change, or do these patterns discussed always result in negative outcomes?
Okay, I can see it there. Okay, so are there any scenarios where we could say that these paths could be used for good, to say to influence people to stop climate change, or does any of these patterns? No, I think they are. I mean, I think there's a lot of good use made out of the technology. As I said, I mean, I was very surprised to see what Facebook had done to people's sites where they were being dismissive of the election of President Lula or President-to-be Lula in Brazil, that they actually, you know, put a sticker on it saying, boom, you know, it's a done deal, right? You know, so I think that there's all kinds of ways in which the technology is being used for good things. But my view is it's too little too late, and it's not in any way, you know, drastic enough. And I think the climate change is a very interesting one, and is something which we're involved in an awful lot. I think the problem with climate change is it's abstract. It's an abstract idea. And because we are not subject to it in an obvious way, day in, day out, though you could argue that the drought in the summer, for instance, was an unusual thing, and, you know, we kind of felt that. But unless you're living in sub-Saharan Africa or Polynesia, then, you know, you're not necessarily going to be exposed to it as a thing every day. So it requires you to think abstractly to figure it out, and to have a say in it. So I think the reptilian approach I talked about earlier on just wouldn't work, right? You know, it's not really it's not in my view at least, it's not the right way to do it at this point in time, because I don't think the human brain is capable of computing anything, you know, that far in advance on average. But yes, absolutely, I think that this can be used for good, and very often is. I mean, we did a campaign recently, an online campaign to get drones into Ukraine, and it was brilliant. We could never have done it otherwise. We sent lorry loads of drones to Ukraine. We'd raised all the money online, and everything was done online, and we had a great result from it. In fact, I can even show you the badge, right? So all that badge was given to us for our work in getting drones, and there was no physical contact with anybody at all on it. So yeah, I think there can be it can be used for good purposes. Absolutely.
So if that balanced equation does exist, and you take it as read that manipulation and disinformation has always existed, you look at snake oil salesmen back in the day, and even to a certain extent religion as a way of manipulating people to do things, is the net impact, the net disbenefit now more or less simply because it's more widespread and moves faster?
I think the key problem, and it might be a kind of roundabout way to answer your question, but I think the biggest problem is that the law, I mean, ultimately the law arbitrates and forces balance at the end of the day, right? You know, you could say that it's a crude tool in some ways, right? But generally it you know, when they say violence is sublimated into the law, you know, and so I think the problem is that the law takes a long time to come up to speed with what's going on in technology. I mean, you know, there's that old yarn about, you know, it's still on the statute books that somebody has to walk in front of a car with a red flag, right? You know, because the law hasn't caught up. I don't know whether it's true or not, but that's the kind of yarn that's spun. But it illustrates a very good point in that, you know, the law takes a long time to catch up with technology, and I think that gap is widening. And in fact, we do quite a bit of work, or we've done a bit of work in the past with lawyers, and they tell us, you know, come and tell us about technology because we chose not to do it at university, right? We don't like technology. So, you know, there is this thing where there's this lead and lag, and I think that's getting bigger and bigger. I think you see things like GDPR, for instance. Apple have just been forced to privacy, and in fact that's affected Meta shares as well as Apple's new privacy policies and so on. So I think that, to answer your question, I think that the imbalance is as much to do with the distance between, or the growing distance between what laws can be enacted to make things better, and people saying, okay, excuse my French, here's an opportunity to take the piss, right? So so I think that's one, I guess, one way to answer the question. Does that answer the question?
Can I? Oh, yeah,
Carry on. Another question, Steve.
Picking up on the GDPR issue,
Yes.
the rule within GDPR that computer says no is no longer permitted in credit and insurance terms. In other words, people are allowed to have a second opinion, which would come in words of one syllable, rather than being shown the algorithm, if anybody knows it. In other words, black box is not permitted if it's queried. So if someone's turned down for a loan,
Yes.
some black boxes, and they can say, I don't like that. I want to have an explanation of the actual reasons.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. You're absolutely right. And my last reading of it is that that's still a slightly grey area, but there are several laws that are going through the mill at the European Union, which will tighten up on it. But the general direction of travel is towards privacy and away from what Cambridge Analytica very kindly illustrated to us in terms of, how people's privacy can be abused. So yes, I very much welcome that.
One last comment. If you haven't seen it, I recommend the movie Don't Look Up.
Yes, yeah, I've seen it. It's brilliant. It is very, very good. Yeah.
Great. Another question.
Yes. The compass you gave is about sustainable development goals.
Yes.
But we are not in a context of a main goal being sustainability, which is fine, of course, but humanizing. So why not the human rights instead? The liberties.
I don't see them as mutually exclusive. I think
Yes.
yeah, the human rights are an extremely are fundamental. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. But I think if you look at the sorry, there's an echo coming. If you look at the sustainable development goals, you'll see that what should come out of adherence to ethics related to human rights would come out in the sustainable development goals as well. All right, it's very difficult to achieve the one without the other. So, but I think for my taste, I think the SDGs give a much broader kind of canvas to paint on.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions in the room? How about you people here?
I've got one.
Great.
So you mentioned the information diet. How do we keep that kind of broad and open?
Do you mean on a personal basis or?
Just in general. So looking at, I know there were some news sources in there that were in the middle. So I'm assuming, going to those news sources first would be like a way of keeping that broad. But are there any other kind of practices that we could maybe implement?
It's a hard thing to do because it's counterintuitive, and I think it's the kind of thing which has got to be taught in school, or actually I'll get it back up on the screen so we know what we're talking about. I think you've got to learn to do it, and I think it can be learned. I think it can be taught in schools, and it absolutely should be taught. I mean, it certainly was when I was at university. It would be a crime not to have, sourced as widely as possible. So I think it just has to be ingrained in the way that people go about doing things. And I think I'm as guilty of this as anybody else. I've got my favorite newspapers I go to. In fact, there's one. I would say that I've got a horrible habit you know, kind of scoffing at headlines in, you know, some of these in some of the tabloids. But really, you know, I'm also very much aware that I need to dig into them, you know, and to understand what other people think. If you're not prepared to understand what other people think, then why should they be prepared to understand what you think, right? I think education is the answer, and it's a very good question.
Great. Well, we're almost at 8 o'clock. Any last questions? Yes. Great. Excuse me. Somebody leaving.
Yes.
Would you make sure you've got a badge? Please, would you just badge yourself?
No problem.
Thanks very much.
My main comment is one of obviously the areas that you talked about around humanizing technology and how we can kind of overcome some of these like problem statements you make was around explainable AI. But I suppose the risk is that who is in control of designing and adopting explainable AI is one of the risks as well.
Yes.
And so it's more of like a comment in terms of how do we, or how does, from a social perspective and a cultural perspective, how do we educate on explainable AI quicker so that it doesn't get into the disinformation space and the negative side of your presentation?
Yes, I agree, and I think, you know, that happens at multiple levels. I think one is that there's now there's an established methodology with explainable AI, and explainable AI, I should also say, is not just exclusive to AI, right? It's actually something which is applicable to all technology, right? I know, you know, there's no reason why we should just think of it in terms of AI alone. But I think that there's several things. I mean, governments have to take this on board and do something with it, and, you know, and take a firm grip on this, and enshrine in law people's responsibilities to make the algorithms that affect us all something which we can all understand. We're not all going to, you know, be data scientists at PhD level, but, you know, it should be something which you can understand at a very basic level, at the least, that everybody should be able to understand. You know, any algorithms which affect us, and most algorithms, particularly, you know, on the large tech platforms, certainly do. So yeah, I'm in violent agreement with you on that. But it's one of those areas I think that only ultimately governments can actually really, you know, have the say over. The other thing is that on a kind of different scale, I think we can all do our part in influencing consumers, right, and influencing where spend takes place. So if you look at things like beef, for instance, these days, beef sales are plummeting and been replaced with you know, with artificial meat. And, you know, how did that come about? There wasn't any government legislation on that which forced that to happen. It was just widespread sharing of understanding of just how bad beef is for the planet and for individuals and so on, right? You know, so these things can happen from a kind of grassroots level. But I think when it's complex in the way that, you know, technology is complex, I think you have to have somebody, a government, to kind of to push it and promote it and to legislate in the right way.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mike. Trust, ethics, morality, legality. There are a lot of big questions here, aren't there? And we, of course, are going to spend the next half hour or so putting the world to rights. Or at least we might try. So here's something for you to mull over. Supposing you just spent all your pocket money and bought a company like Twitter, fired the entire board, and now it's up to you. What rules, what codes, what ways of thinking would you put into place in your new company? That's what I'd like you to think about whilst we do something else. Mike, I'm going to invite you to go next door and have yourself something to eat and drink. And I'm going to invite you to do the same.
Cheers.
And let's continue the conversation. Thank you very much.
All right, wonderful. thank you very much indeed. I'm so sorry I can't be there. I'd love to have been there and to chat, but next time.
Yeah, and in case you are keen to see it all again, you can, because the video is going to be available fairly soon on our YouTube channel. David, will the slides be there too?
Usually only the video, so we'll send an email with the link to you.
Okay, great. So catch it, tell your friends, watch it all again. But meanwhile, come and let's join the conversation.